My name is Ethan Brooks, and on paper, I'm the kind of man glossy magazines skip over without even a footnote. 45, medium build, hair receding in a way that barbers call dignified, an Auburn University hoodie for every day of the week, and a practical four-door sedan the color of wet cement. My neighbors think I'm pleasantly dull. I mow the lawn on Saturdays, wave at delivery drivers, and never let the recycling bin overflow. At the software firm where I act as lead stability engineer, I'm the ghost in the machine, the guy who slips bug fixes into production before anyone notices the system was sick. Coworkers peg me as reliable, maybe even pedestrian, but they would be shocked to learn that, late at night, my hands built the neural lattice behind DeepQuil, a predictive text engine now licensed by half the Fortune 500. 2 years ago, after a silent bidding war, I sold that lattice to Frostbite Systems for a figure that made seasoned venture capitalists whistle through their teeth. $40 million, wired into a blind trust under the name Ashwood Holdings, a nom de plume I borrowed from the street when my mother grew up. The sale stayed confidential by design. I crave puzzles, not praise, and I'd rather be underestimated than displayed like a trophy. But none of that mattered to Lisa, the woman I married 5 Aprils ago under a storm-thick sky in Savannah. Lisa Paxton was clever and kind, a reading teacher who smelled faintly of lilac soap and swore she didn't care about money or status. She claimed her childhood in rural Ohio had immunized her against material vanity, and I believed every syllable. She laughed at the clunky puns I embedded in server commit messages. She swore that the best vacation was car camping and grilled cheese over a fire. Her vow, spoken barefoot in damp sand, ended with "for simple joys above all." I stored that line like a safeguard key. Before everything imploded, Lisa and I built rituals only we knew the choreography to. Tuesday ramen nights, where we'd rank the week's bug reports by absurdity. Saturday, dawn jogs through Piedmont Park, pausing so she could read plaques aloud in her best documentary voice. On the anniversary of our first kiss, we made a tradition to visit the planetarium and bet on which child would ask why Pluto was demoted. Our love, I thought, was a private open-source project, code all could read, but only we could commit to. Selling DeepQuil should have changed everything, yet I kept the windfall quieter than a monk's prayer. Why conceal success? Partly humility, partly paranoia. I'd watch peers burn through sudden riches like fireworks misfired in daylight, their personal lives scorched by expectation. I drafted a different algorithm. Hide the liquidity event behind a lattice of trusts. Maintain salaried employment to preserve routine. Reinvest gains only in sectors I understood intimately. Lisa, I figured, valued experience above opulence, so the secrecy seemed harmless, an intellectual exercise in stealth. I did not factor in the possibility that stealth, once discovered, can resemble deceit. The fracture began on the first warm Friday of May, when dogwood petals still skittered across our driveway. Lisa and I had planned a weekend escape to a cabin beside Wolf Drake Lake. Fishing, board games, no Wi-Fi, our annual tradition. I had already packed the trunk, graphite rods, her grandmother's cast iron skillet, marshmallows. Lisa left for sunscreen and chocolate. She should have been gone 20 minutes. She stayed away 3 hours. When she finally returned, the world arrived with her in the form of a matte black Maybach that idled like a panther behind her Prius. A driver in a charcoal uniform leapt out to open the rear door, and from that glossy portal emerged a man who seemed carved out of entitlement, Sawyer Grant. The name rang like high brass in my memory. His father, Marcus Grant, had ascended to the White House on a reformist wave, and every gossip site framed Sawyer as the crown prince of American ambition. He wore a navy suit tapered to within a breath of his life, and a smile that had no room for uncertainty. Lisa slipped out next, clutching 3 designer shopping bags and wearing a sundress far beyond a teacher's salary. Her gaze slid past me, fixing instead on a hedgerow as though the leaves might buffer the impact of her words. "Ethan, we need to talk," she managed. Her throat flexed, but her eyes remained cold. Inside, seated at our reclaimed wood kitchen island, Sawyer commandeered the space as naturally as oxygen. "I'm sure you recognize the family," he said, enunciating like a press conference. "Lisa and I are together now. She deserves a life on a grander scale than this." His gesture encompassed the modest craftsman walls I had spent 2 years renovating. Lisa's voice, once playful, sharpened to a scalpel. "I love you, Ethan, but love doesn't pay for experiences. I'm tired of living on clearance sales and planning one holiday a year. I choose a future that shines." The syllables landed heavier than any physical blow. I felt, not anger, but a curious detachment, as if the scene were coded by someone else. When they left, our screen door snapped shut behind them like a period at the end of an ugly sentence. Over the following weeks, tabloids documented Lisa's metamorphosis with time-stamp precision. One headline showed her aboard a teak-decked yacht in Monaco, lips stained with Veuve Clicquot. Another captured her exiting a Balinese resort, flanked by bodyguards wearing earpieces coiled like silver snails. Hashtag Grant Glamour trended. Comment sections filled with fire emojis. I watched none of it live. Instead, each night after my 9 to 6 shift, yes, I still kept the day job for amusement. I changed into running shorts, jogged 5 miles, cooked basil pasta, and logged into Ashwood Holdings. The numbers grew predictably, ticking up with market surges I had forecast months prior. 40 million had become 46. Lisa's departure confirmed a thesis I'd written in the margins of my private journal. Some people love the shape of security, not the substance of companionship. She had traded a man who hid his wealth for a man who flaunted his father's. The irony would have been comedic if it hadn't been so anatomical. Revenge narratives are usually loud, keyed cars, public confrontations, but software engineers prefer elegance. I decided on a demonstration, not destruction. Something that would let truth reveal itself under the ballroom lights where people like Sawyer felt safest. Through an intermediary law firm, I funneled $12 million into the West Coast Children's Oncology Research Trust, becoming, anonymously, its primary benefactor. Large gifts require galas. Galas require guest lists. My alias, Malcolm Ashwood, received an invitation bordered in foil so thick it could double as a mirror. The event would be held in September, in the Art Deco splendor of the Arginum Hotel, downtown Los Angeles. Sawyer and his entourage were already confirmed attendees. Lisa's name shimmered beside his. Preparations became a second act of life. I took waltz lessons to erase my awkward shuffle, studied vintage couture, and had a tuxedo tailored by a Seville Row expatriate who took pride in microscopic stitches. On the day of the gala, I flew first class, refusing the private jet offered by the charity board. Modesty is also camouflage. In the weeks leading up to the gala, I rehearsed contingencies the way a stage actor practices monologues. I built digital dossiers on every Grant family associate, cross-referencing leaked data breach dumps with corporate contribution records. At 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, over black coffee, I discovered a pattern of shell companies nested inside one another like Russian dolls, each funneling super PAC money toward candidates friendly to a quiet rollback of antitrust regulations. One of those shells, Carina Capital, had the same Cayman Islands accountant as Sawyer's venture fund. Useful knowledge, I thought, sliding the puzzle piece into place. I booked a suite at the Argentum under a secondary alias, Sebastian Clark, complete with a burner phone set to French-language defaults and a wardrobe that could pass as European old money. That suite faced the loading dock, where catering vendors delivered crates of lobster tails and Chilean sea bass destined for the gala. Over 5 nights, I memorized security patrol routes, hotel Wi-Fi handoffs, and the blind spots in the lobby's 4K surveillance grid. Old habits die hard. Before writing code, I had studied the art of penetration testing, breaking into systems so companies could learn how to defend them. On Thursday evening, the hotel hosted a pre-event wine tasting from major donors. I attended in the Clark persona, listening to Sawyer pontificate about sustainable cobalt mining, a topic I knew he'd lifted verbatim from a white paper published that morning. Lisa stood beside him, nodding as if she were the first to hear the insights. When they drifted away, I struck up conversation with an investment columnist who despised nepotism. I fed him precise breadcrumbs about Sawyer's fund performance, quoting numbers too accurate to ignore, but too generous to be mere gossip. The columnist took copious notes. Information wants to be free, but it also likes a proper introduction. Later, in the hush of my suite, I reflected on the morality of my maneuvers. Was I sabotaging Sawyer, or merely revealing what already reeked beneath the varnish? Morality, I decided, is sometimes a matter of timing. Pull the curtain too early, and people blame the messenger. Pull it at the right second, and the audience applauds the magician for exposing the trapdoor. The Argenum's lobby smelled of white tea and ambition. Murals of constellations arched overhead. It felt appropriate, since constellations are just stories we tell about random dots until they seem ordained. I presented my invitation, accepted a crystal tumbler of mineral water, and drifted through clusters of sequined donors. Each group whispered stock tips and practiced concern for sick children. I had to remind myself that the research dollars were real, even if some of the empathy was counterfeit. Then I saw her, Lisa, radiant in silver Versace, skin dusted with some iridescent powder that caught every chandelier beam. Sawyer held her waist with proprietary pressure. Reporters orbited them. Flashbulbs popped like miniature supernovas. I waited until Lisa's laughter peaked, then stepped into her peripheral vision. Recognition stole the oxygen from her lungs. I watched her chest stutter as circuits overloaded. "Ethan," she gasped, though the room's noise almost swallowed the word. "Supporting a cause close to my heart," I said, letting the phrase hang like a password. Sawyer pivoted, displeased. We weren't introduced. His handshake was limp, a courtesy extended under duress. "Ethan Brooks," I replied, then added gently, "founder of Deep Quill." A hush rippled outward. Lisa's pupils dilated as graphs recalculated in her head. Sawyer's jaw flexed so hard I wondered if dental veneers might shatter. A Wall Street columnist nearby almost dropped his IPA. Sawyer recovered first. "You're the guy Frostbite paid. What, 10? Maybe 15 million for some code." 40. I corrected, scanning the silent crowd. "Royalties." Lisa's flute of champagne tilted. Liquid starburst struck the carpet. "You never told me," she whispered, wounded by omission, oblivious to the fact that her own omissions had preceded mine. "I needed proof," I said, voice low. "Now I have it." I excused myself to greet the foundation director, a woman who had already earmarked my donation for a gene editing wing. As I walked away, I felt 100 eyes measuring me against the myth Sawyer had just seen collapse. Fall became winter. Headlines shifted. Interest in Sawyer's romance cooled when analysts zeroed in on the president's stalled infrastructure bill. Lisa's texts began like raindrops, gentle and sparse. "Can we talk?" Then came voicemails, letters, a bouquet of peonies left at my office. I remained polite but distant, the way one might close a window against a storm one can predict won't end soon. In January, a ground-level staffer at Frostbite tipped me off that Sawyer's hedge fund had been front-running tech acquisitions, using leaks to reap illegal windfalls. I forwarded the evidence to an investigative reporter under the condition of anonymity. When federal agents raided Sawyer's penthouse, Lisa appeared on the periphery of cable news footage, cheeks streaked with mascara. Her future had shattered faster than champagne on marble. By the time spring returned, I had met Grace Turner, a documentary film editor whose apartment was filled with rescued plants and film festival lanyards. We collided in line at a neighborhood bakery when I accidentally paid for her espresso after tapping my phone too quickly. She quoted Vonnegut, returned the favor by buying my croissant, and texted me later to debate the ethics of AI-enhanced color grading. Grace learned about my fortune on our third date, after she noticed the discreet security detail I employed. She laughed, a sound like wind chimes, then asked if I preferred splitting the check or alternating. I chose alternating. She chose the more expensive entree out of principle, and I loved her for it. Grace's presence rewired my apartment's emotional circuitry. She rearranged my bookshelf by the frequency of marginalia, arguing that books should stand beside those they've influenced, not by an arbitrary alphabet. She brewed coffee using a Chemex and a metronome, claiming the poor rhythm changed the flavor profile. Skeptical, I tried it and tasted a citrus note I would have sworn impossible. When I joked that she was running a firmware update on my habits, she countered that I'd already patched hers by convincing her to use version control for film edits. Small collisions of expertise became our love language. One Sunday, we road-tripped across North Carolina to watch a meteor shower from a decommissioned airfield. While waiting for darkness, we played a game. Each person revealed a moment they were ashamed of, then rewrote the memory as if advising their younger self. Grace spoke about missing her father's final voicemail because she'd silenced her phone. I confessed about hiding my fortune from Lisa. Grace's advice to college-aged Ethan was simple. Trust built on half-truths is a hammock hung by one hook. The imagery stuck. When the meteors finally arrived, burning secret blue streaks into the sky, I thought of billions of cosmic grains sacrificing themselves for a brief silver testimony. Worth it, I decided, if someone looks up at the right second. 2 months later, I drove Grace to the Wolf Drake cabin. We fished, burned marshmallows, and watched meteors scratch the sky. I told her the whole saga. She listened without judgment, then kissed the scar on my left hand, a memento from soldering prototype board to my garage years ago. One twilight, we heard tires crackle on the gravel drive. Lisa stood at the tree lean, shoulders hunched as if the pines themselves accused her. Sawyer was awaiting indictment. Bail conditions had clipped his wings, and her social accounts had bled followers. She looked smaller. "Ethan," she began, voice threadbare. I made a terrible mistake. I believed her. Remorse radiated in a way that cannot be forged. I walked to meet her halfway, enough to spare her pride, but stopped short. "Lisa, your mistake wasn't choosing someone else. It was valuing image over substance. I hope you unlearn that." She nodded, tears silent, eyes reflecting the cabin lights that weren't meant for her anymore. When she turned away, I felt only relief, like setting down a suitcase unseen until its weight vanishes. Strange how a single choice can fork reality the way a misplaced semicolon forks a process. Had Lisa returned from errands 5 minutes sooner, perhaps the Maybach would never have rolled up our drive, and I'd still believe poverty was the only specter capable of haunting love. Debugging life, I've learned, is identical to debugging software. You trace the stack backward, finding the first call that corrupted memory. In marriage, the call stack isn't lines of code, but moments. A glance at a price tag, an offhand joke about private schools, my silence every time Lisa asked how the retirement fund looked. I'd answer with abstractions, diversified, healthy, never with numbers. Numbers make abstraction concrete, and concrete is heavy. It cracks floors if set down abruptly. I replay that omission the way QA replays an edge case. Lisa, barefoot in our kitchen, grabbing 2 mugs, asking if we could afford to invite her sister on our next cabin trip because Cheryl could use the break. I said we'd see, meaning yes, of course, but my hesitation drew a crease between her brows. That tiny wrinkle was the first bug report, logged silently. After everything, I did run the retrospectives. I enumerated the user stories. As a husband, I want transparency so that trust compiles correctly. As an individual, I want privacy so that identity cannot be decompiled by opportunists. Those stories conflict. Any sprint completing one breaks the other. Agile coaches recommend negotiation, but people aren't sticky notes on a Kanban board. Grace approaches the conflict differently. She asks for visibility, not control. She likes to watch the build process, even if the build fails, because the red console text teaches more than the green. On evenings when an edit crashes her workstation, she calls me over not to fix it but to witness the stack trace together. Fellowship in failure. There's a patch I'd never written. Sometimes I receive invites to tech conferences where keynotes parade exponential growth curves. I decline most, but accept a few, speaking under my own name now. I talk about stealth wealth as both shield and prison cell. During Q, invariably someone asks if I regret staying anonymous so long. I answer truthfully. Anonymity kept grifters at bay, but it also locked genuine curiosity outside the gate. Better, I tell them, to practice selective disclosure. Paint windows, not walls. The applause sounds polite, faint. Perhaps it's hard advice after the talks. Junior engineers sometimes corner me to ask how to safeguard their hard-earned windfalls. Better, I tell them, patch the gaps before they widen. That summer, Grace and I began drafting a joint manifesto for whatever came next. Half technical roadmap, half love letter. We carved out weekly sprint reviews on the cabin porch, poring over solar array performance metrics one evening and debating which wildflowers to seed the next. While I sketched data flow diagrams for her documentary's post-production pipeline, she layered color grading tests over my code-annotated commit logs, turning dry function names into evocative subtitles. In those sessions, I realized that collaboration, when done right, doesn't dilute identity, it multiplies it. One morning in late August, we discovered a wounded blue heron tangled in discarded fishing line by the dock. Grace, with her steady hands, untangled the mess while I stood guard against crows. As she cradled the bird, whispering soft reassurances, I marveled at how her empathy extended beyond people, into the wild, the vulnerable, the unprotected. We nursed the heron in a makeshift enclosure until it could stand on its own, then watched it lift off in a ragged but determined first flight. That bird's resilience felt like a parable. Healing requires both patience and daring. By September, I'd agreed to advise a small nonprofit that builds AI-driven tutoring tools for underserved students. I still stayed out of headlines, preferring to call in via video link in my hoodie, but I checked in regularly, sometimes at dawn when the cabin's mist glowed like low-hanging stars. Grace edited footage of real classrooms alongside the nonprofit's engineers, crafting stories that demonstrated how code can empower, not alienate. Together, we hosted virtual workshops where students wrote their own Hello World programs, then used them to animate messages for their families back home. Watching their proud smiles streamed across continents felt more gratifying than any gala spotlight. On our one-year anniversary of the gala confrontation, Grace surprised me with a handwritten letter in the same cryptographic crossword style I'd once used to propose to Lisa. She encoded a simple question in arithmetic hashing. Ready for the next million-day adventure? I decoded it beneath the maple beams of our cabin's loft, then hugged her until the wood creaked. No grand gestures, just two people who'd learned to value honesty above all else. That night, we toasted with mason jars of cider, toasting to transparency, to growth, and to the spaciousness that comes when you stop carrying secrets like burdens. The lake reflected our lanterns in ripples, as if echoing our resolution to step forward unguarded. I closed my eyes and heard Grace's breathing in the dark, steady and serene. For the first time in a long while, I felt like my life was one seamless program. No hidden variables, no unresolved exceptions, just a clean, satisfying run of love and purpose.